Mr. Shroff, thank you very much for speaking with us here at Bloomberg Quint. What would you identify in this 100-year journey as the key turning points for the Amarchand Mangaldas brand?
Menika, it's a very long history, and I like to describe it really as a legacy more than anything else. And if you look back at the span of history of what all events have occurred in the world during this 100-year span, the Great Depression of the early 20s, a World War, the freedom movement, independence, the formation of the Supreme Court, adoption of a constitution, the split of Maharashtra into 2 states, the formation of so many institutions that exist today, regulators, financial institutions, the birth and death of so many large corporates who rule the roost today, and so much jurisprudence that has evolved. It boggles my mind to think that Amarchand Mangaldas as a concept, as an idea, as a brand existed through all of this and was part of the market through this entire period. So clearly there would have been some life force that took us through all of this, and I think there are many reasons. I think 2 is I think there is a strong value system which I would really attribute as the core of what made us survive this long and remain relevant. There could be firms which are older than us, but I think to remain so relevant and so vibrant in the marketplace, I think there has been something special about the history of this firm, and with all humility, I think it is the value system.
I have no doubt about that. But your father's generation was the second generation, Mr. Shroff.
That's right.
The first generation was your grandfather's generation.
Right. But the nature of the practice was very different. I think there were essentially 2 practice areas at that time. One was dispute resolution and litigation, and I think the firm was quite well known for that.
Okay.
The second was what was traditionally called conveyancing and property transactions and personal law. So it was a lot of that. And it was really a reflection of how the business community and the client community at that stage was. One, and secondly, in terms of what the competitive landscape was. So there were a lot of what I would call English originated law firms at that time. And the legacy of Amarchand Mangaldas was really more of the sort of the domestic Indian law firms who had a certain segment of the market at that stage, and they excelled at what they did. But that was the sort of scenario at that stage of time. But if I now go back and look at what are the lessons of history, I think at every stage the firm innovated and pushed itself one level more than what was the status quo at that time. So it's really a history of challenging the status quo at each and every turn of history.
I'm looking for great stories from your grandfather's time, your father's time. What can you tell me of incredible clients, of cases won and lost?
So the stories of my father's time are of course more recent and also something.
And you worked very closely with him in Bombay.
Absolutely. So I'm thinking in terms of how he worked with great clients, like he was very much a part of how Reliance came to the capital markets, right down from the very first when Reliance went public, or when the various financial.
So you were lawyers to the IPO?
Yes, and I think from that time, or when the famous convertible debenture issues were invented. I think the convertible instrument was invented probably in Arlington Chambers office with my father leading the charge. So those were the kind of contributions that were made by that generation to the capital markets, to corporate law. Some of the famous battles that my father led were the Escorts case, which is still the defining judgment on corporate democracy. Then later on there were a number of other securities market cases involving Larsen and Toubro and the Ambani takeover. That was one of them as well. And
the failed takeover.
Well, I'm not going to get into that, but at least I'm just going to stick to the public record. I'll just stick to the public record. I'll stick to the public record on that. Those were some of the other sort of famous cases. But the kind of contribution that was made in the market practice and the evolution of project finance and corporate finance, I mean, the joke used to be, or the saying used to be, that in the world, at those stages when there were development financial institutions like IDBI, IFC, and they're still there, but he was regarded almost as an institution by himself, because nothing that they did would be done without his clearance. So such was the hold and the impact that he had in that era. So it was from a size perspective, it was a small firm, but it punched way above its weight.
Draw for me the changes that you have seen take place in the legal services landscape from the time your grandfather and father ran a firm to the time that you now run a firm.
I think there were several stages, but if you look at it in three broad stages, my grandfather's time, and then there was a hiatus in between, in my father's era, and then the later period from particularly after he passed away in 1994. The earlier, the first phase of my grandfather's time was the sort of traditional law firm that one would have imagined in that era. It was a small, from a size point of view, it was small but comparable to a peer group at that time. They had couple of practice areas of which disputes and probably traditional conveyancing was the main area.
It was all 100% family owned, right?
Yes, but there were two branches. There was Amarchand Shroff and then there was Mangaldas Mehta. From his branch there have been no descendants in the business.
And so how did the practice evolve, right? Today if you were to look at what a leading law firm does in terms of practice areas, in terms of the way it structures its partnership. I think the best way to illustrate it is to see how things changed. Particularly in the early 90s when the next generation sort of took over, when the sort of modern law firm was invented in India, and I think the Amarchand Mangaldas brand really took the leadership. So when you say modern, what do you think?
So non-family members in the partnership, a more fairer approach to sharing of profits, creating formal career tracks. I think the traditional way of looking at things was that you either had to be a son or a daughter to join the firm. I mean, there's no other way you could inherit into a partnership. Even if there was a multi-family partnership or there were different others, the only way in which you could become a partner is to wait for your uncle or your father or somebody to move on and then you took their place. So that model was, I would say, fundamentally challenged by our model in the early 90s. And you may recollect that in the year 99-2000 we actually brought in a management consultant. We brought in BCG to look at restructuring of the firm, and I think that was when the birth of the modern law firm effectively got created. But
actually, Mr. Shroff, many would say, and those who have sort of observed the legal services industry closely, that for a very long time Amarchand Mangaldas was known to be a family firm more than anything else, and in fact in the last 10-15 years now we've seen a lot of entrepreneurship in the space, young lawyers setting up their own firms. You've seen different structures of firms come up, whether it's GSA or the way Trilegal is structured itself, and that in some ways y'all are still a family run firm.
So I think we still hear that, but I think we are still, I would say we are still the only institution which has a very vibrant career track in the way that we do. I mean, there are hundreds of people in the firm who are not from the founder family, who have an equal opportunity to make a career and join the partnership. So I think the model is very different now. So there is an obvious conclusion to be drawn from the fact that the founder family still occupies the leadership position in the firm, but power is shared in a much broader way now. I mean, we have so many executive institutions, committees and others that look at firm development as well. So I can see where that comment comes from, but it is probably a founder-led institution rather than a founder-owned institution only.
But in fact, all the journalism that you read on firms, right, and especially yours, I think one of the recurring themes, and this doesn't seem to go away, is that you're very hesitatingly opened up to a profit partnership with others outside of the firm, and that even initially when you opened up it was just 5 or 10%, and then it's taken a long time for the firm to open up to a more democratic structure. The departure of certain key high profile lawyers over the last 10-15 years has suggested, at least in many of the reports, that they thought that it was at Amarchand it will always be the Shroffs that are the ceiling in a sense, right? And it's a glass ceiling of sorts, and you'll never really get above that. So there's a limitation.
I think things have moved on a lot from that, because actually if you look at the concept of a broader equity partnership, and the first time the introduction of at least a modified lockstep in India, that concept was led by us, and it's still one of the few firms, if not the only firm, that has it in a formally documented and open way.
Founders is one thing, but families in control?
So families, I think the concept of families as controlling itself has got modified. You can draw a conclusion because there's more than one family member in the business, so it's a conclusion that you could draw. But the fact is that power is far more democratized, and I think there's much more institutionalization of the firm that has already happened, and it's happening across various firms, and it's a continuous reinvention process.
You don't think it serves as a... So look, we've debated this so many times now, right? On the advantages and disadvantages of being a family-run anything, corporation, partnership, any venture of sorts. It brings long-term investment, it brings long-term thinking, long-term approach, patience, all of those things.
I think frankly we won't have been around for 100 years.
But does it hurt you when it comes to talent? Does it hurt you when when people look at the structure and they say, but at the end of the day it's always going to be the Shroffs that will occupy the corner office and not us? It's a question of all businesses that are family found.
But in terms of partnerships, I think the concept of corner office itself is changing. Okay. It's a far more democratic and a more participative structure.
Would you, if you had to rethink how you did the last 15-20 years at Amarchand, even before Shardul and you split up, would you have rethought the structuring of the firm, maybe opening it up a little faster?
But we already had opened up a lot, including having executive committees, and I think that is already on.
Sure.
We
so
already
you
had
don't
that stage.
see that this structure, could have been different at all in any fashion?
I personally feel that if you take away the founder element of our history and our future, you actually create more serious risks on its continuity. That's my view.
But so many of the large global law firms in the world are now no longer founder or founder family led.
But if you look at the experience of any business in India, you will find less of those. I mean, if you take the same analogy for the corporate sector, why do you have so many preponderant founder led businesses in India as compared to institutional businesses overseas? And I think part of the reason is longevity and continuity. And it just works in India.
You have stressed over the last few years in the restructurings that you've done that this is going to be a single leader firm, right? Single leader model is what you call it.
In the first 5 years.
In the first 5 years.
Which ends in May 2020.
And thereafter what happens? Do you envisage a non-Shroff ever being the head of this firm? It's not ruled out,
absolutely not ruled out. I think we will just, as a firm, we will elect the best leader and we will choose the best governing model that is required for that time. There is no question about it.
But do you think, given the history of this firm, that you can ever look at a non-Shroff? Do you feel as if it will dilute the Amarchand Mangaldas brand?
No. It's not the family that runs the firm. It's the firm that runs the family in terms of how we structure it.
To come back to how you've seen the legal services landscape change, right?
Yeah.
I think we're standing at a point in time where people are talking about automation in legal services, where they're talking about, algorithmic responses, robotic work, artificial intelligence, however you choose to describe it. Equally, when you look at the rest of the world in the last 5-8 years, we've seen several non-lawyers enter the legal services business, right?
LPO and all
competition from a variety of other new entrants, so to speak. So technology, competition, the changing nature of business across the world. What would you identify as some of the key challenges that a firm like yours will face in the next 100 years?
I think the challenges that we face will be no different from what a lot of my peers will face as well. Technology is one of the challenges. I think the very nature of society in terms of how laws are being framed, laws are being administered, the global nature of a lot of enforcement, I think a lot of these challenges will come in the way of changing the business model for how law firms are structured, whether how independent law firms will survive in a global environment, what sort of partnerships that they will have to create in terms of and networks that they will have to create in order to be able to deliver a more global services. So there are lots of challenges. I think one of them is the challenge from technology, the other is the changing nature of talent itself, the millennial problem.
Trust me, that is not limited to law firms.
Well, at least we are part of it. The third, just the global nature of law and law and enforcement. and consequently, the days of thinking of yourself as only a one jurisdiction firm, even if you may have offices and a presence in only one jurisdiction, these are some of the big challenges. So therefore, developing a global mindset in terms of how you implement and execute and provide services to your client, that is going to be one of the big challenges.
Sorry, please.
I think it's we are in for a next couple of decades of tremendous change.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things we've discussed again for the last 10 years is the death of hourly billing, right? Every few years there's yet another book written. Yeah, there's another book written about how it ought to die. In fact, there was a BCG report just from last year which suggested that firms should abandon hourly billing and move
firms will happily abandon it if clients abandon it.
Well, so I'm just curious to know, if you had to list 5 things that will change, let's assume hourly billing being one, partnership structures being the other. What are the 5 things that you think will be very different from a law firm point of view 5 or 10 years down the line?
I think the number one thing would be role of technology.
Okay, so do you actually envisage that being a big thing in India as well?
I think big parts of, absolutely, and I think it will happen much faster than we think.
Are you all investing in that yourselves?
We're looking at it very seriously, absolutely.
Artificial intelligence.
But I don't think it really makes a difference to some of the more judgment-oriented aspects of our practice. But there are very prominent parts of our practice which could easily be done by a machine, the way things are going on in terms of how fast invention is taking.
No firm in India as yet has deployed
It's
any
a big
of these
theme
solutions.
in London just now, as you know.
Yes, it is. Yes.
But I think the technology for it to be available in a meaningful form over here might take a little longer.
Okay.
But it's a relevant theme. It's on our radar for sure.
Okay.
That's number one. The second, I think, is which will change in terms of the 4 or 5 things that you mentioned. I think how firms institutionalize their value systems, I think, will change a lot. At this point of time, if I can call it that the era of the modern law firm is about 2 decades old, there's a fair amount of immaturity that has developed because of the rapid pace at which a lot of law firms have grown, and because of the extent of the demand. I see more institutionalization coming in to the law firm sector.
More consolidation, more mergers?
No. I think in terms of just moving away from a very transactional approach to building a practice to a more long-term orientation. I can see that certainly for ourselves.
Okay. How does that change business? I'm still not able to fully grasp what institutional versus transactional
I think there will be more investment in the business, more capital invested in the business. There would be more emphasis on training.
Okay, so we still have covered only 3 or 4 changes. Hourly billing?
Hourly billing,
do you see it dying at all?
I don't see it dying, and I think the reason is particularly clients in the financial sector. They're so used to this model, and they're not used to seeing thinking about fees and compensation for value that they get. It's really measured as a unit of time, of how much time that you spend, and it's a fundamentally flawed model because it incentivizes the wrong kind of behavior. But I don't see it dying in the next 8 to 10 years at least. So it'll take longer.
One of the other things, and I was reading this 2016 report by the Law Society of England and Wales, and it's sort of prescient about what's going to happen here on, and they've spoken a lot about new entrants and competition, because Britain has actually seen that happen over the last 5-10 years. In India, we're a spectacularly closed market, if I might say so, and I think for the last 10 years we've been simply debating whether to allow foreign law firms to come in or not, and the door has not opened even an inch. Now this year, in 2016 it did. But that's happened so many times now, it's now the business that cries wolf, right?
Yeah.
So do you see the Indian legal services industry influenced by those forces at all? Non-lawyers?
It's one of those always, in a manner of speaking, the wolf at the door. And that forces firms to think of modernizing, it forces firms to think of being more competitive. My personal view is we should just get it over with and just move on.
I wanted to ask you that, because as a community, fraternity industry, that most of the times is advocating free markets, more access. You are a really protected lot in India, isn't it?
Yeah,
thanks to all the various bar councils when it comes to advocates, thanks to the way, law firms are...
it's now become a very convoluted debate, and nobody knows where that debate starts and where it ends. Net result is exactly what you said, is that it has remained closed. So, and my personal view is we should just get this over with and move on to the next
If
level.
it were to happen, do you see large-scale consolidation in India to prepare for even larger global firms entering the country?
No, I think there will be a few who will stand the ground and stay independent, and a lot of others would see mergers as mergers and folding in to international firms as the preferred course. Who they will be, I don't know, but I don't see too many firms wanting to remain independent.
You don't see too many firms?
I don't see more than 3 or 4 at
So
the
you're
most.
saying consolidation will happen, but it will happen with the foreign firms. You don't see Indian firms coming together?
No,
I
don't see them coming together.
So can you ever envisage, okay, this is the headline question in all interviews, right?
Yes.
Like a day when you think that the threat of foreign firms is big enough to prompt, let's say, a Cyril Amarchand and an AZB to get together or something like that, that kind of big ticket. Y'all do that for every other industry in business. Would you see that ever happening for legal services?
So not sort of getting into any names, but why not? I mean, if that's the way to survive and remain independent, I would never say never. But the question is of do you retain your identity and culture? And traditionally, our firm at least has, and the Amarchand legacy has been an organic legacy. It is not a legacy of because it's very culture destructive, and which is why I think we've been able to maintain our position. So we generally don't like mergers. We think they're very even lateral acquisition is always a challenge.
Yeah.
Our comfort zone is producing our lawyers rather than acquiring lawyers.
I'm trying to think back at the last large law. I mean, lots of regional offices have been acquired, partners have been acquired, but I can't remember.
Our core is organic, completely organic.
No, I'm saying otherwise in law firms in India. I cannot remember.
There have been many.
Very large scale, sort of coming together.
You mentioned another name that's created by lateral.
So that was, I get that. That was Zia and, Ajay coming together on that. But, okay.
I don't think there's enough track record in India to show that same city mergers work.
Okay.
There's probably something fundamentally wrong in how, or unready, wrong is probably too strong, but unready for Indian professional partnerships to accept that kind of model.
Okay.
I think Indian professional services firms, and I'm not just talking about law firms, need strong individual leaders to make them happen. And in a merger, you always have to compromise on some of those principles.
Yeah. The other question I wanted to ask you connected to this is, if ever a market opens up to foreign law firms, we went through a brief period in India where we saw these best friendships take place, and then even those either were legally challenged or just did not survive the period of time. Do you see a firm like yours, which is now Cyril Amarchand Mangaldas, actually sort of finding a way to ally with a global firm?
We've always been quite open about our desire to be independent. And I think the world of independent law firms is far bigger than a world of. So, this alliance concept I've never understood. You either merge or you stay independent.
So neither of those are things that you would contemplate.
Engage without having the benefits of marriage. It's one of those.
So neither of those are benefits that you would contemplate, and neither of those are situations
we considered and rejected them long back.
And your mind hasn't changed since then?
Not at all.
Why is that? Can you explain to me why you see no value or you see little reason, to maybe, today you're strong in Bombay, you've built over the last 2 years a practice in Delhi, you've got a thriving South practice, but if you wanted an international practice, don't you think that's a better way to go about it?
No, I think your question was about would we ally with a foreign law firm?
Yes.
Unless there is an economic merger, what benefit does allying with somebody give you? It actually creates far more conflicts for you.
Okay, so what about an economic merger?
But that's selling out effectively or folding in to an international global firm.
And that's
like what happened in a lot of the accounting firms. So then we lose our identity.
And that
our
identity is not something you would want to.
That's exactly right. At least I don't see myself doing.
So do you see Amarchand Mangaldas, whether it's Cyril Amarchand Mangaldas or just Amarchand Mangaldas, the brand, becoming a global brand? Now I know you'll argue and say it is a global brand, Menka. All the foreign companies that come to India recognize the value of the brand.
I think they're a globally recognized Indian brand.
Yeah, but do you see yourselves over the next 10, 15 years, 20 years, foreseeable future, becoming a global brand?
I can, not for the next 10 years, but beyond that I can see some presence outside India, but it's too far into the, frankly, these days you think in terms of 2 or 3 years. What I do know is that I would like the firm to survive till 2117.
Okay, 2117. Okay. Since these days you think in 2 or 3 years, we are, bang in the middle of very exciting times. It's the beginning of a new year. We're still recovering from a cash crunch. We're also coming to terms with President Trump and all the accompanying economic, social challenges that the world has thrown at us this year. You identified in your New Year letter to team members 4 or 5 areas of practice that you expect will be at the forefront this year, right? So you spoke of transaction services, of course, but that's fairly generic. Regulation, a new paradigm in dispute resolution, regulatory investigation, tribunalization, and corporate governance. Explain to me where and how you see opportunity in all of these.
I think all of these are fantastic opportunities, and I think these are all representative of what's actually happening in society today. Take the corporate governance theme. I think we are seeing the sort of golden era of a real conversation on corporate governance happening, and I think that's an area where law firms have a serious role to play, because they bring the kind of boardroom presence and the kind of judgment that is required. So that's great for law firms, particularly a firm like ours. Then look at the area of dispute resolution. I think India, not only have the stakes become larger, but I think the need for more institutional mechanisms for quick conflict resolution, not just because of this ease of doing business stuff, but just because of just sheer commercial logic, has become far more important. So I see that as a absolutely ripe area for much more progress and modernization. Then the area of tribunalization. So because of our court systems being overburdened, India has invented and actually carried it to an extent of, making a fine out of tribunal. Everything that you want, you just put it into a tribunal. Now, be that as it may, I think it also creates a lot of opportunities for specialization, and specialization which is relevant for firms like ours as well. So I'm very optimistic about the sheer opportunities that would be available for young lawyers in general and for firms like us. It's great.
Are you equally optimistic about the economic opportunity? Because in the last 2 years, ever since you and Shardul decided to split, there has been this searing battle for talent in this country, in the legal services industry, which has burnt almost everyone involved, right? And I'm being very candid. I think every large firm has participated in the fight for talent. We've seen big name lawyers move from one firm to another, and at really high values.
See, I think the battle for talent was always there. At any given point of time in a market, there is a particular trigger that is required. The next trigger will come when foreign law firms come, or there might be something else in between, I don't know. So one shouldn't attribute too much blame to the split. It is also,
I'm giving you the credit for it. Many lawyers profited from it, I must say.
I think the reality is that if you look at the modern Indian legal profession, starting from the sort of early 90s, there were a lot of lawyers who were in there, who had about 15, 20, 25 years in the business. And that's a time when also a lot of movements take place, because people want to change, the professional organizations haven't evolved as fast as the aspirations that people have. So it was a change that, it was one, I think it was probably the match that lit the fire. The grass was dry. So that's how I see it, and I think it's not a bad thing, because frankly firms are better today because of the churn that happened. We are better today.
But
I think we also got an opportunity to become far more.
There was some very expensive poaching going on.
It happens in every industry, doesn't it? I think
of course, I'm not surprised. I mean,
and I think
it happens all the time.
And it may seem like pain when you look at it externally. I think it's actually made firms better. I think it certainly made our firms better. I mean, we were on both sides of poaching. We got poached from, and we also poached. But so what?
But economically?
Economically, it's been fine. I think it's been fine for everyone. If you actually, if there was some way in which you could get access to everybody's P&L, you'd find they're doing better today than they did before.
Including all the lawyers who got poached.
Including all the lawyers, because it just takes the market
business
to
expanded.
I think the
business
market
expanded
grew. The market grew.
So clients are picking up the bill.
Probably. Yeah. No, certainly the market has grown in the last, and I think to that extent it's been a movement in the right direction.
Okay, I have a couple of questions which I was fairly confident you won't answer, but I'm still going to ask them anyways, right? You spoke about how your father had worked to help build, at least from the outside, Reliance. You were very closely involved in the separation of those two brothers, Mukesh and Anil Ambani. More recently, in the last 2 months, you have been closely involved in the separation of two non-brothers, which is Ratan Tata and Cyrus Mistry. What or how would you describe some of these big, fairly epic battles, that have taken place?
I never discussed my matters. But I think every major corporate event and major corporate sort of situation has had some involvement of our legacy. And I think the reason why we are trusted to come into those situations is because we not only just bring competence to the situation, I think we are also seen by the market as bringing character to each of these situations. In everything that you mentioned, involved as much judgment and character and personality as it did involve the law as well. So it's been a learning experience for the firm at every stage. I think the firm grew at every stage as well. But I think it also helped in finding resolution.
Do you have a count of how many family separations you have been part of?
Lots.
No,
frankly, we don't maintain
50,
count.
100?
But I think it's a very interesting human experience that when you are helping a family, the legal contribution is about 10 to 15%, except for the structuring once everything is done. A lot of it is psychotherapy and social advice, and just being a patient ear, being an honest communicator, and just being a trusted advisor who who the market knows you can be completely trusted, that you will keep people's confidences and bring judgment. I think that's been the most fascinating part of the firm's history. I mean, the previous generations have done it. I have done it as well, and I find
Have you ever been emotionally on the other side but forced to represent one side?
Yes, but I keep emotion out of it.